the heart of this tragic tale were two sisters, Imogen and Clara Pendleton, whose lives had been intertwined in a complex web of love, rivalry, and resentment since childhood. Clara, the elder of the two, had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and married to the charming and successful architect, Leonard Ashcroft. Their union was the envy of Windermere, a seemingly perfect marriage that everyone aspired to emulate. Imogen and Clara were born into a family of moderate means. Their father was a local fisherman, and their mother a school teacher. From an early age, it was clear that the two sisters were as different as night and day. Clara, with her gentle demeanor, was the pride of her parents. She excelled in school, was beloved by her teachers, and seemed to navigate the social waters of Windermere with effortless grace. Her path in life seemed predetermined. She would go to college, find a respectable job, and settle down with a good man to start a family of her own. Imogen, however, was a force of nature from the moment she could walk. She possessed a wild spirit that both intrigued and unsettled those around her. While equally intelligent as her sister, Imogen's academic achievements were overshadowed by her rebellious nature and penchant for pushing boundaries. As they grew older, the differences between the sisters only became more pronounced. Clara pursued a degree in education, following in her mother's footsteps, while Imogen bounced between various majors, never quite finding her place. It was during this time that Imogen's manipulative tendencies began to surface. She would charm her way out of trouble, using her wit and allure to bend situations to her advantage. Imogen's relationships were always intense, but short-lived. She seemed to thrive on the chaos of new romances, only to grow bored once the initial excitement faded. This pattern left a trail of broken hearts and bitter exes in her wake, further cementing her reputation as the black sheep of Windermere. Clara, meanwhile, had returned to her hometown after college and quickly caught the eye of Leonard Ashcroft, a rising star in the world of architecture. Leonard had come to Windermere to oversee the restoration of the town's historic lighthouse, but found himself captivated by the town's gentle beauty, both in its landscape and in Clara herself. Their courtship was swift and passionate, culminating in a fairy-tale wedding that was the talk of the town for months. Leonard's career continued to flourish, and soon he and Clara were living in a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, their life together seeming like a modern-day fairy tale. But beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, cracks were beginning to form. Clara, always the dutiful daughter and wife, found herself yearning for something more. She had given up her own dreams of travel and adventure to settle in Windermere, and a part of her resented the sacrifices she had made for the sake of her marriage. Leonard, for his part, was battling his own demons. The pressure of his high-profile career and the expectations of small-town life weighed heavily on him. He loved Clara deeply, but there were moments when he felt suffocated by the perfection they were expected to maintain. It was into this delicate balance that Imogen re-entered their lives, having spent years drifting from city to city. She returned to Windermere, claiming to want to reconnect with her roots. In reality, she was running from yet another failed relationship and mounting debts, seeking refuge in the only place she knew would take her in. Clara, ever the loving sister, welcomed Imogen with open arms, offering her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. But as Imogen settled into life in the Ashcroft household, the dynamics between the three began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. The stage was set for a drama that would shake Windermere to its very core, forever altering the lives of all involved. At first, her presence seemed to breathe new life into Clara and Leonard's relationship. Evenings were filled with laughter and reminiscence, as the sisters caught up on lost time, with Leonard playing the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. But as days turned to weeks, Imogen's true intentions began to surface. Her eyes would linger on Leonard a moment too long. Her casual touches became more frequent and deliberate. She would find excuses to be alone with him, asking for help with her car, seeking advice on job applications, or simply catching him in the kitchen late at night when Clara had already gone to bed. Leonard, initially oblivious to Imogen's advances, found himself increasingly drawn to her vibrant personality. Where Clara was steady and predictable, Imogen was spontaneous and exciting. She listened with rapt attention to his architectural designs, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly understood. In those moments, Leonard felt a spark he hadn't experienced in years. Leonard was a man of principle, devoted to his wife and the life they had built together. He tried to distance himself from Imogen, making excuses to spend more time at the office or taking on additional projects that kept him away from home. Imogen, however, was not so easily deterred. She recognized the internal struggle in Leonard's eyes and saw it as a challenge rather than a deterrent. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his insecurities and unfulfilled desires. One evening, as Clara attended a school board meeting, Imogen orchestrated a seemingly innocent dinner with Leonard. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and created an atmosphere of intimacy that was hard to resist. As they talked late into the night, Imogen carefully steered the conversation toward Leonard's passions and dreams, areas where she knew Clara had never fully connected with him. Leonard felt a rush of emotions: flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stammered a response, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Imogen had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing against his. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are?" The tension in the room was palpable. Leonard knew he should leave, should put an end to this dangerous game before it went too far. But something kept him rooted to the spot, caught in the gravitational pull of Imogen's allure. As Imogen's lips met his in a passionate kiss, Leonard's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to crack, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night were a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt for Leonard. What had begun as a momentary lapse in judgment quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair, with Imogen and Leonard finding increasingly creative ways to be together without arousing Clara's suspicions. Their rendezvous ranged from hurried encounters in Leonard's office to carefully planned business trips that allowed them to escape the watchful eyes of Windermere. Imogen reveled in the thrill of their forbidden romance. Each secret meeting fueled Imogen's sense of triumph over her sister. For Leonard, the affair was an intoxicating mixture of excitement and self-loathing, each encounter leaving him both exhilarated and racked with guilt. Imogen, ever the master manipulator, knew exactly how to keep Leonard ensnared. She played the role of the perfect lover, alternating between passionate temptress and vulnerable confidant. She would listen to his frustrations about work and his unfulfilled ambitions, offering the understanding and validation he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Leonard," she would whisper in their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this small town can offer you." Her words were carefully chosen, planting seeds of discontent in Leonard's mind about his life with Clara. She painted vivid pictures of the future they could have together, a life of excitement and passion, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Leonard found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Imogen and his loyalty to Clara. The double life he was leading began to take its toll, manifesting in mood swings and uncharacteristic behavior that didn't go unnoticed by his wife. At home, Leonard's guilt manifested in a mixture of emotional distance and overcompensation. There were days when he could barely look Clara in the eye, and others where he would shower her with affection, driven by remorse. He threw himself into his work, taking on more projects than ever before, using his career as both an escape and an excuse for his frequent absences. Imogen, for her part, played the role of the doting sister-in-law to perfection. She would engage Clara in long conversations, feigning interest in her day-to-day life, while secretly reveling in her deception. There were moments when a flicker of guilt would cross Imogen's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was causing her sister. But these moments were quickly suppressed, overshadowed by her desire for Leonard and her deep-seated need to finally outshine Clara. As the affair progressed, the risks they took became greater. They began meeting in more public places, their need for each other overriding their caution. There were close calls. A neighbor who almost caught them in an embrace, a colleague of Clara's who saw them dining together in a neighboring town. Each near discovery only added to the intensity of their relationship, the danger becoming part of the allure. But as weeks turned to months, the strain of their deception began to show. Leonard, once energized by the affair, now found himself constantly on edge. The guilt was eating away at him, affecting his work and his relationships with friends and family. He began to question whether the passion he felt for Imogen was worth the destruction of the life he had built with Clara. Imogen, sensing Leonard's internal struggle, doubled down on her efforts to keep him engaged. She became more demanding of his time, more insistent in her declarations of love. Her manipulations became more overt, playing on his guilt and his desires in equal measure. As their affair reached its fever pitch, neither Imogen nor Leonard realized that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down. The truth, as it often does, was quietly making its way to the surface, ready to shatter the lives of all involved. While Imogen and Leonard were lost in their passionate affair, Clara was slowly piecing together a puzzle she never wanted to solve. At first, the changes were subtle. A lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on Leonard's clothes, hushed phone conversations that would abruptly end when she entered the room, and an emotional distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. Clara, ever the optimist, initially chalked these changes up to work stress or a midlife crisis. She tried to bridge the growing gap between them, planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, only to be met with half-hearted enthusiasm from Leonard. Her sister Imogen, ironically, became her confidant during this time, offering sympathetic ears and reassurances that only served to twist the knife of betrayal deeper. But as weeks turned to months, Clara could no longer ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind. She began to pay closer attention to the inconsistencies in Leonard's stories. About late nights at the office and out-of-town meetings. She noticed the way Imogen's eyes would follow Leonard across a room, the barely concealed hunger in her gaze. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Clara found a matchbook from a hotel in a neighboring city tucked into the pocket of Leonard's jacket. A hotel she knew wasn't anywhere near his usual business haunts. The discovery sent a chill down her spine, the physical evidence making it impossible to deny her worst fears any longer. Torn between confronting her suspicions and the fear of what she might uncover, Clara found herself in a state of constant anxiety. She began to withdraw from friends and colleagues, unable to bear the thought of sharing her suspicions and making them real. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, and she found herself watching Leonard and Imogen like a hawk, searching for any sign that would confirm or deny her fears. In a moment of desperation, Clara even considered hiring a private investigator. But the thought of strangers prying into her private life was too much to bear. Instead, she decided to confront Leonard and Imogen separately, hoping that one of them would crack under the pressure and reveal the truth. Little did Clara know that her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more devastating than she could have ever imagined, forever altering the course of all their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy afternoon in late autumn. She had spent the morning steeling herself for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, how she would remain calm and collected in the face of potential heartbreak. When Leonard walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with the sight of his wife standing in the room, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew instantly that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," she began, her voice quivering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Imogen." The color drained from Leonard's face, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. In that moment of stunned silence, Clara saw the truth written plainly across his features, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been sleeping with my sister?" Leonard's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew there was no point in denying it any longer. "Clara, I'm so sorry. It just happened." Clara cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you trip and fall into her bed? How could you do this?" The floodgates opened, and months of pent-up suspicion and hurt came pouring out. Clara hurled accusations and questions at Leonard, her voice echoing through the house. Leonard, for his part, could only stand there and absorb her fury, offering weak apologies that did nothing to stem the tide of her anger. As their argument reached a fever pitch, the front door opened, and Imogen walked in, stopping short at the scene before her. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Imogen, how kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Imogen's eyes darted between Clara and Leonard, her mind racing to find a way out of this situation. Leonard, torn between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His words only served to redirect Clara's fury. In a fit of rage, Clara grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Leonard's head. It shattered against the wall, the crash punctuating her words. The noise seemed to snap Imogen out of her defiant stance. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Leonard and Imogen exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Clara collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had known, the future she had planned. It had all crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the storm raged outside, Clara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, shame, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of this sordid drama. The bartender, a grizzled man named Frank, watched with growing concern as Clara knocked back drink after drink. He had seen his fair share of patrons drowning their sorrows, but something about the wild look in Clara's eyes set him on edge. "Another?" Clara demanded, her words slightly slurred. Frank hesitated, but the steel in her gaze made him think better of refusing. He poured her another whiskey, neat, silently vowing it would be her last. As the night wore on, the bar emptied out, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol had dulled the sharp edges of her pain, replacing it with a bitter resolve. Around midnight, Frank gently suggested it was time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" Clara waved him off, fumbling in her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Frank reached out to stop her, but Clara was already stumbling towards the door. As she stumbled into the parking lot, Clara managed to get her car started, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night. She pulled out of the parking lot, her vision blurred and her reactions dangerously slow. The winding coastal road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt barely visible in the moonlight. As she drove, Clara's mind was a chaotic whirl of emotions. Anger at Leonard and Imogen's betrayal, shame at not having seen the signs earlier, and fear of the uncertain future that now lay ahead of her. The speedometer crept higher as she pressed down on the accelerator. It was on a particularly treacherous curve that disaster struck. Clara's dulled reflexes failed her, and she took the turn too fast. She felt the car begin to slide, tires screeching against the asphalt. In a moment of terrifying clarity, she realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a sickening crunch of metal, and suddenly Clara was airborne. Then darkness consumed her as the car plummeted over the cliff's edge, tumbling end over end towards the jagged rocks below. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when Officer Aidan Pearson received the call. A jogger had spotted a wrecked car at the bottom of Whispering Cliffs, a notorious stretch of coastline. Pearson, a seasoned member of Millhaven's small police force, felt a sense of dread as he made his way to the scene. The sight that greeted him was grim. The car, a silver sedan, was barely recognizable, having been crushed by the impact and battered by the waves. As the rescue team worked to extract the vehicle from its precarious position, Pearson began the somber task of piecing together what had happened. The license plate, miraculously still intact, quickly identified the car as belonging to Clara Wilcox. Pearson felt his heart sink. He knew Clara, as did most people in Millhaven. The thought of delivering this news to her family weighed heavily on him. As the morning progressed and the full extent of the tragedy became clear, whispers began to circulate through the town. Clara Wilcox, dead in what appeared to be a drunk driving accident. It seemed impossible. Completely out of character for the woman everyone knew as responsible and level-headed. Detective Fiona Blake, called in from the nearest city to lead the investigation, sensed there was more to the story. Her keen eye noted details that didn't quite add up, the lack of skid marks on the road, suggesting no attempt to brake, the odd angle of the car's trajectory off the cliff, and the fact that Clara had been drinking alone, something her friends swore she never did. When Blake arrived at the Wilcox residence to break the news, she was struck by the palpable tension in the air. Leonard Wilcox's reaction to his wife's death seemed oddly muted, tinged with guilt, and the presence of Imogen Gray, Clara's sister, in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed Clara's death, Detective Blake immersed herself in the investigation, peeling back layers of Millhaven's seemingly idyllic surface to reveal the turmoil beneath. Her first step was to retrace Clara's final hours, a task that led her to the rusty anchor and its reluctant bartender, Frank. Frank's account of Clara's state on the night of her death painted a picture of a woman in deep emotional distress. She was knocking them back like there was no tomorrow, he told Blake, guilt etched on his weathered face. I tried to stop her from driving. This testimony conflicted sharply with everything Blake had heard about Clara from friends and colleagues. The woman they described was cautious, responsible, not someone who would drink to excess and then get behind the wheel. The detective's suspicions deepened. Blake's next focus was on Leonard Wilcox and Imogen Gray. Their behavior since Clara's death had been odd, to say the least. Instead of grieving separately, they seemed to be leaning on each other for support. Their interactions were marked by meaningful glances and hushed conversations that would abruptly cease when others approached. A breakthrough came when Blake interviewed Clara's closest friend, Olivia Harper. At first, Olivia was reluctant to speak ill of the dead or cause more pain to the family. But as Blake gently pressed, the floodgates opened. Clara had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia admitted, her voice quavering. She suspected Leonard was having an affair with Imogen. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Blake immediately sought to corroborate this information. Digging deeper into Leonard and Imogen's recent activities, bank records showed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, and expensive gifts that aligned with times Leonard had claimed to be on business trips. As the evidence mounted, Blake brought Leonard and Imogen in for separate interviews. Under the detective's relentless questioning, their carefully constructed alibis began to crumble. It was Imogen who broke first. "Yes, we were having an affair," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Clara found out that night. We had a huge fight, all three of us. But I swear, we didn't know she'd left the house after we went." Leonard, confronted with Imogen's confession, finally admitted to the affair but vehemently denied any involvement in Clara's death. "We made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice hollow with regret. "But I loved Clara. I would never have wanted this." Blake believed they were telling the truth about not directly causing Clara's death, but she knew their actions had set the tragic events in motion. The detective's report painted a clear picture. Clara, distraught after discovering her husband's infidelity with her own sister, had sought solace in alcohol. Her decision to drive in that state, while ultimately her own, was the direct result of the emotional trauma inflicted by Leonard and Imogen's betrayal. In the end, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Clara's death. But in the court of public opinion, Leonard and Imogen were already condemned. The truth of their affair spread through Millhaven like wildfire, forever tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that Clara's death would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As time passed, the raw pain of the events began to dull, but their impact on Millhaven remained. The town would eventually regain its outward appearance of tranquility, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the calm surface of small-town life, passions and secrets could swirl with deadly force. The tragedy of Clara Wilcox had forever changed the soul of Millhaven, leaving an indelible mark on all who called it home.